I am Jane Chauvin. My PhD is actually in gifted education, and my master's and undergraduate degrees were also in branches of education. I had a double major in undergraduate of both English and history. So I kind of taught a variety of things. I taught in a high school for the first about 6 years after I graduated, got my undergraduate degree. Then I was hired at Dominican College, a college that no longer exists. In fact, Loyola occupies those buildings, so it's very familiar to me whenever I go over there. Dominican closed in the spring of 1985. And I was hired at Loyola in the fall of 1985. And I was here for approximately 22 years. After the hurricane in 2005, 2006, Loyola made the decision to close its education department. And so I retired. And I was retired for 90 days. And then the University of New Orleans called me and asked me if I would come to work for them. And I was there for 6 years. And they were very happy years. It's a wonderful place. But Loyola called me and asked me if I would come back and restart at least a portion of the education department they had had before. And I was very happy to do so. I truly feel there should be an educational presence, a professional educational presence here at Loyola. And we currently have a secondary education program which certifies young people to teach in grades 6 through 12. So that's where I am right now. Well, first of all, they have to be very well versed in their subject matter. They have to be intelligent. They have to want to work with young people. I think it's the noblest of all professions. St. Ignatius seconded that, or maybe he was the first who said it. He felt that being a teacher served humanity in so many ways, but one of the principal things is the fact that you have the opportunity to impact so many lives, and particularly at these younger ages where people are so vulnerable and so impressionable, that the impact you make on a young child or a teenager is truly going to last for a lifetime. You have to learn how to motivate people. You have to learn how to open a class with something that really grips their attention, how to change what you're doing about every 15 to 20 minutes during that block of time, and then how to close in a way that they understand and come back to the major theme of what you've been trying to teach them. So it's a lot. It's a lot to ask of anyone. But with experience and with practice, people become very good at this. I go out to schools every week, and I'm constantly amazed by the quality of teaching I see. We teach I don't want to call it elaborate because it makes it sound like it's voluminous and cumbersome. It's not that. But we teach people how to plan so that when they go into that classroom, number one, it quells their fears. When you know what you're going to do and you're prepared and you have a written plan, an outline that you're going to follow, it's like a safety net for you. Anytime you get a little befuddled, you can look down at your notes, you know where you are, you know what you're going to do. It also allows you to get all the props that you need. Maybe you need a video, maybe you need a costume, maybe you need any number of artifacts that you want to use in that classroom. Well, when you have all of that lined up ahead of time and it's in place, it bolsters your confidence. You know what you're going to do. You know you have everything that you need. You also have to set goals for yourself. You have to know what your objectives are. And at the end of that class period, you have to be able to measure whether or not those objectives have been met. We spend a lot of time On differentiating, I use the terms interchangeably, and most people do, goals and objectives. Actually, they're very distinct. Goals are the big picture, more aspirational. They deal with things like appreciation, opinions, things that might take a lifetime to accomplish. But that's the big picture, and that's important. But day by day, we take a little piece of that, and we write objectives that are very specific, very observable, and consequently very measurable. And our young people going out, I like to think, are pretty expert at this. Our curriculum, and it's set pretty much by the state, they give us the parameters. We then can develop our courses within those. There is an introductory course, and it's called Multicultural Education. This is vitally important because of the society we live in. I've lived in New Orleans since the mid-60s, and I've seen it change dramatically with the inclusion of a much larger Hispanic population, an Asian population that wasn't here almost at all when I first moved to New Orleans, and other minority groups that were really not here in any significant numbers. So our introductory course is an introduction to multiculturalism and how that impacts education. When we talked about exceptionalities, well, the same could be said for ethnic groups, religious groups. We need to be cognizant of that. We are not teaching an undifferentiated blob of humanity. We're teaching individuals. We then progress. We have two courses that are taught for us by the psychology department. Adolescent Psychology, and that's because of our age group that we're certifying in, and Educational Psychology, which deals with all the theorists that we were discussing and their impact on understanding how we learn and how we process thought and all of those kinds of things. We then have a course, everybody has to take one course in reading. Why? Because even at the secondary or high school level, teachers encounter individuals who cannot read or are reading on very, very low levels, and they need to have skills and techniques for working with them. We also offer a course in classroom management. We do not call it discipline. We call it management. The key to management, first of all, is being an exceptionally good teacher. If you are, it will take care of approximately 98% of your students. The other 2%, we can figure out what to do. We also offer a course in exceptionalities. We call it the learner with special needs. And we talk about the things that I talked about with you. And then we offer two methods courses. The first is a general course. We take what they've learned in adolescent and educational psychology and all of these others, and we look at general planning, organization. We revisit classroom management, looking at it through this lens, and we write lesson plans. We develop unit plans. We spend a lot of time out in the schools. All of our courses require field work, but we do a lot of it. We do a directed field work. I go out with them, and we look for specific things, and we come back and we analyze what we've seen and how we might do it, and what were the best techniques we saw and things like that. The second methods course that they take is specific to their discipline. So if you were an English major, it would be how to teach English. But you've already got these other skills in place. You can't do it all in one course. You could, but it would be pretty full. And the same thing for history or social studies, sciences, math, whatever it is, art, any of those things. And then the capstone is the student teaching. And that is all day in a classroom, where at least for half the semester you are the major teacher. It's learning by doing. for it to fit into a four-year program, and that is our goal, they need to start by sophomore year. And that's simply to work everything in. Because if they're going all the way to a teaching certificate, the end product comes in their senior year, and it is a 9-hour block. They get 9 hours credit for that. They are in a school from approximately 7:30 to 3 o'clock. And they are teaching just like a regular teacher. The difference is they have a master teacher right there with them. Even when they're doing, the instruction, when they're the major person instructing that day, that teacher is there evaluating their performance, giving them tips. It's a wonderful opportunity. It's an apprenticeship, if you think of it that way. That takes a lot of planning, because usually at most they can take one more course, because it's time consuming, because then they have all the preparation after they leave the school. It can be done, but it takes careful planning. They need to take the introductory courses, and then the methods courses, the assessment courses, sophomore, junior, and one semester of senior year, and then either fall or spring of senior year, they need to do that teaching experience. My students basically come from the liberal arts, from English, history, math, and science. I have psychology students who are in my classes, and they're wonderful. Psychology is taught in some of the more advanced high schools. However, the state certifies it under social studies. There is not a separate certification for psychology, but I encourage them to come and take the courses, because if they're going to teach, they need the tools. It is possible. The state has changed the way it certifies in the arts. It does it more by portfolio now, rather than a particular curriculum. But I certainly can work with those individuals, and then of course they would take the how-to courses from us in terms of teaching, planning, assessment, classroom management, those types of things. Teaching's a wide open field, and there's a niche for almost anyone that truly wants to teach. In assessment, Bloom, who's a very famous psychologist, came up with a hierarchy of cognitive processes. They start with knowledge, which we would know as memorization, and it goes all the way up to evaluation or judgment. When we're writing these objectives or setting these goals, we don't want everything to be at a rote memory level, although there's some things that it's just more efficient to memorize. We're not saying that we want to throw memorization out completely. That's not feasible. But we want, particularly your older students, your high school students, to move up to those higher levels of analysis and synthesis and evaluation, where they're thinking critically. That is such an earmark of a Jesuit education, to teach people how to think, how to question, how to formulate their own opinions, to look at both sides of something. Very little in life is strictly black and white. So in order to do that, people have to be taught. That's a cognitive process that is teachable. Even very young children can do likenesses and differences, more or less, better or worse. And then by the time they're in high school, they can really articulate this. They can form intelligent arguments for why they might choose one thing over another. But in order to teach it, you also have to understand it and be able to demonstrate it. So we work a lot on that. As in most other professions, at certain times, some theorists may be more popular than others, but I don't think we ever totally throw anybody out. We kind of recycle them, reshuffle them, look at them in a different context. Maria Montessori, and Piaget for that matter, looked at the very young child and looked at how these cognitive processes developed. And they saw the potential for very young children to do rather complicated things. It was a matter of setting it up in steps that they understood and building, almost like building blocks. In fact, Maria Montessori did use building blocks. Piaget looked more at cognitive development and, for instance, how do people learn things like quantity, volume, when a ball goes out of sight, at what age does the child understand it's only hidden from view? An infant thinks it's gone, it's disappeared. All of that is part of what we go through in order to form abstractions. And the older child, usually sometime after age 11, it's not a magic number and month, it happens when it happens. But the older adolescent is able to abstract to the point that they can wrestle with very difficult concepts that are not observable, and yet understand this and be able to use the mind to take it apart, deconstruct it, and reconstruct it. So all of these, and Dewey sort of opened up the environment more and got us away from thinking that everything was rote memory and kind of robotic, and advocating giving more freedom to individual expression, breaking away, break the model, try something different. I really see him as the first of the freedom riders, in a sense, where education is concerned. And I think that all of these people, I honor all of them in my classes. They will never be out of style. Other people may have a slightly different take. They may update it more, for instance, with technology. That didn't exist when these people were around. We have to take that into consideration, but it still goes back to what they said. We never get away from those basics. I think, like with anything else, I think there's good and there's bad. Too much interaction with an iPad cuts down on socialization. And as human beings, we learn a lot from our peers, from everything around us. We increase our vocabulary, our spoken vocabulary, because you can pick up an inherent or an internal vocabulary just by looking and reading things. But you have to practice talking to develop a spoken vocabulary. And so I think that in that sense, too much of it is not a good thing. On the other hand, think how quickly they can access information. Things that would take us weeks and months and trips to the library, they can get almost instantaneously. That is marvelous. What we have to watch is, I'm not sure all of it is totally correct, and anybody can be an authority on the internet, so to speak. And that's part of what we have to prepare students for. I think there's a place for it. We can't deny that it's here. It's going to stay with us. But I think parents may want to limit the amount. And it's like we used to use television as a babysitter. Well, now we use the iPad. Too much of it is not good. It's a tool. And a tool is strictly a means to an end. Do we want to do away with it? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Technology opens up the world to us. We just have to make sure it's the world we want them to see. Probably elementary geared courses might be more valuable for parents of young children. Much more is done at that level with developmental stages. We review them, for instance, in educational psychology, in ed psych, and even when we're planning, for how to teach. But an elementary education curriculum is going to deal more because the progressions, if you look at what a first grader can do and a fourth grader, that is a world apart. The distinctions in the secondary grade levels are not quite as dramatic. They are there, There's a big difference between a 7th grader and a 12th grader, certainly. But your biggest leaps are in your earlier stages. I would recommend that everybody take a developmental psychology course or a child psychology course. I think that there is much more emphasis on accountability now than there ever was. A lot of that accountability resides with the teacher, and I believe in that, yet I have some problems with it also. I think that there is more emphasis on getting to know and working with that individual child, and of course, as products of a Jesuit education and our firm belief in cura personalis, we absolutely preach this in every class, that you're not teaching some undifferentiated blob of humanity. You are teaching X number of individuals. I think, though, that what the public, and particularly politicians, fail to realize is that a teacher works with an individual that is influenced by so many entities over which the teacher has absolutely no control. If you were to guarantee that every child entering a classroom at 8:30, let's say 8 o'clock in the morning, had a good breakfast, came from a fairly stable home, regardless of the composition of that home, had started the day in a positive frame of mind, was going to be in school at least 95% of the time, and went home to an environment that supported and helped with homework and things that they needed to do at home, I think virtually any teacher could meet the benchmarks that have been set up. But the truth of the matter is that somewhere between 85% and 88% of children coming to school today in the public sector, those variables are not in place. It's difficult then to think that a teacher can be social worker, nurse, therapist, and teach what he or she is supposed to teach. I think that all of the goals that have been set, I would endorse. I think we always need to raise the bar a little higher. We want children to believe they have potential. We don't want to be satisfied with the status quo or what's average. But they have to be well nourished physically and psychologically to be able to do that. It's a tragic loss. Children find themselves in art. Art can allow them to express things maybe they don't even have words for. Some children, some individuals, they don't have to be children, are not as academically inclined as others, but they're talented. And this is their avenue to show what they are good at. It's freeing, it's expressive, it's creative. It is so important to a child. Music, art, dance, it's expression. Sometimes after doing it, they find words they didn't even know they had. I've seen it happen. It sets them free. It has to be. It just has to be. When we teach methodology, we always take a segment and we talk about how do we introduce art and music. You can introduce it into everything. Science, math. There are all kinds of studies that talk about Beethoven and math and soothing music in the background and, you know, allowing people just to sing if they want to sing. It breaks the tension. It frees them. It relaxes them. It gives, I don't know, it feeds the soul. The soul needs to be in anything they do. I couldn't live without it. They can't either. Neither can you. The difference might be in how high or how far they can go with something. because their ability to abstract is sometimes greater. Their ability to understand concepts that are very difficult. Their ability to create things that were not there before. Think of a Jonas Salk. Think of an Einstein. In other words, they were able to think of things that other people, places people had not gone, or had gone but weren't able to push it to its highest level. But many of the things, one of the reasons I went into gifted education was to find out about the methodology, because I truly believe that part of it can be used with anybody. But some people simply, think about music. Lots of people enjoy it. I enjoy it, but I have no talent to produce it. Other people have that talent. And some people can learn from others and learn to play an instrument. Other people create music. You know, it's talent and its ability to push boundaries. Not all of us can push as far as some other people can. The study of exceptionalities, going from the most gifted or the most talented, the highest intellects, down to those who, for whatever reason, genetic, accident, illness, whatever, have diminished cognitive abilities. And then all of the various illness-related or birth defects or whatever might have caused other exceptionalities, whether they were sensory, whether they were physical, or whatever. That is a whole other area of education. Our young people have to learn something about that. In 8 courses, you cannot become specialist. But for those students who are going to teach grades, let's say 6 through 12, at that age level, those children are mainstreamed. Classrooms are referred to as inclusive classrooms. Excuse me. We have to teach how to differentiate instruction to accommodate these students. Every lesson plan that my students write, they have to think of a hypothetical student that has some type of challenge, whatever you want to call it, some reason that they learn differently. And they have to describe how they would teach the same lesson, but what the accommodations would be for that individual. If it's someone with low vision, it might be acquiring textbooks with a larger print. If it's somebody that is hard of hearing, it might be seating them closer, making sure they can read lips, having someone take notes for them, possibly with a carbon, or so that the notes can be given, because it's often difficult for them to write and read lips, or strain to hear and also write. It could be a physical disability. Some children that have problems, for instance, with spina bifida, depending on where that break or that pinch was, they may not have control of their hands, but they can learn to use a stylus, and they may need special equipment. So just figuring out, what would you do? How are you going to help that individual do the same thing and learn the same thing, but maybe in a different way? People are late bloomers, and that is particularly so. Sometimes we've seen it at the college level. Well, it happens in high school also. When they're in classes and they change classes and they have a little bit more choice about what they're going to study, suddenly they get turned on to something and they begin to excel in it. Then they realize they need these other things, if they're ever going to go anywhere with it. I really would not like to see that being done too early. I just think people need every opportunity to explore that we can give them. I'm not saying that I think every single person needs to go to college. I'm not saying that. I think we need to honor the various vocations, and we need to impress upon people how valuable they are to humanity. But I'd like to see that decision pushed off to junior or senior in high school at the earliest. I think it has to be a combination of both. And I think there's got to be a lot of guidance in terms of vocations with these individuals. I don't think in any way the individual should be left out of a decision. I think sometimes people are not motivated, but if things are explained to them, you may not even realize that child has aspirations to go to college and go into one of the professions until they're confronted with the fact that if their behavior, i.e. grades or whatever, in other words, that this is what it's going to take for them to do that, suddenly they wake up because it's important to them. On the other hand, I don't want to sound like I think vocational tracks are less than. I simply see them as other options. But even in their choice of those, I don't think real young people know enough to know which one of those they might want. Number one, beginning salaries have increased quite a bit. The last I saw, they're somewhere between $34,000 and $55,000, and that's just in Louisiana. In places where the cost of living is higher, California, New York, they'll be somewhat higher than that. If you look at starting salaries of most people in the liberal arts, they fall pretty much in line. There are some other things. There are some areas of business, of science, that may pay more. But they're not as rock bottom as a lot of people would lead us to believe, nor are other people going out and making a whole lot more than that in the first few years of employment. Now, prices or figures, let's say, that I am quoting are from public school systems. It might vary somewhat if you were in a charter school, although they are pretty much in line with public schools. They vary somewhat in the private and parochial sector. High schools tend, in those sectors, high schools tend to pay a bit more. That's not so in the public sector, but it just happens to be in the private sector. I can't really give you an answer for that. First of all, fortunately or unfortunately, American society equates money with status. Until you pay teachers more, people who believe in that are never going to see it. In other words, on the same level with other professions. Because people constantly talk about how much money doctors make, how much money lawyers make, you know, and why would you want to go into education? It doesn't pay anything. Hear this all the time. It has to start in the home, though. If parents don't show respect for teachers, why would children? I think we have to stop blaming teachers. You know, when anything goes wrong in education, it's the fault of the teacher. Well, I've already laid out for you. There are so many variables that teacher cannot control. If all she had, or he had to do was teach, they'd probably be exceptional. The other thing I think that's a real mistake, we expect teachers right out of college to be perfect. What other profession does that? They need to go into teaching environments where they're mentored, where somebody still checks on what they're doing, where they have a department, because that's the way middle schools and high schools are organized, other teachers that they can talk to, they can process with, they can get help.